Welcome to another episode of Questions History. We don't rewrite, reimagine, or recreate history. We simply ask a question that tells the story. On today's episode of Questions History, we ask 5 questions to Christopher Columbus in Jamaica, 1494. Let's journey. Christopher Columbus arrived in Jamaica May 1494 during his second voyage to the Caribbean. By this time, he was no longer simply exploring. He was operating under the authority of Spain to expand its empire, claim land, and extract resources. His mission had shifted from discovery to control. Jamaica, known to its indigenous inhabitants as Jamaica, was not an empty island waiting to be found. It was already the home of the Taino community who built a sustainable and organized society. When Columbus landed, he entered these communities who initially received the Europeans with curiosity and, in some cases, what you call Southern hospitality. However, the Spanish presence quickly changed the nature of that relationship. Columbus claimed the island for Spain, marking the beginning of foreign control. Although he did not immediately establish large settlements in Jamaica, his arrival opened the door for Spanish colonization. Over time, Spanish settlers imposed a system of forced labor, introduced new diseases, and disrupt the social and environmental balance of the island. The Taino population, which had thrived for generations, had begun to decline rapidly. This moment is important today because it represents a turning point where Jamaica's history shifted from indigenous development to colonial domination. It challenges the traditional narrative of discovery and instead frame Columbus's arrival as the beginning of a process that led to cultural loss, population collapse, and long-term transformation. So we saw that the year was 1494. What happened? Columbus came to Jamaica and seized it. Why did it happen? The Spanish were simply expanding their empire. And why is this important today? This is important because this was the beginning of colonization. But now that we have established question 1, let's move into question 2. What is the background and its most important players? The encounter between Columbus and the Taino people was shaped by two very different worlds meeting for the first time. On one hand, the Taino, who had lived in the Caribbean for generations, developed in a system of agriculture, trade, and community life. Their society was organized but not militarized in the same way as European powers. On the other side, the Spanish were driven by economic ambition, religious motives, and competition with other European nations. Columbus himself was acting under the sponsorship of the Spanish monarch, which expected returns in the form of land, wealth, and influence. The Taino leaders known as the caciques, played a central role in the early interactions. They controlled local communities and were responsible for maintaining order and facilitating exchanges. Initially, these interactions were not hostile. The Taino had no reason to assume that the newcomers intended to dominate or exploit them. However, the Spanish operated under a different mindset. They viewed the land as something to be claimed and the people as a potential labor force. This difference in perspective created a fundamental imbalance from the very beginning. Columbus himself was not acting alone. He was a part of a broader system of expansion. His actions set the stage for future settlers, soldiers, and administrators who would establish permanent control over the island. In summarizing question 2, we saw where the Tainos had established a very peaceful society dominated by trading, agriculture, and such things of the like. We saw that they had a local community leader by the name of the cacique, and we saw where Columbus arrived, and this created a cultural imbalance and misunderstanding. But now let's examine question 3. What escalated the situation after Columbus' arrival? Journey with us. The escalation began with the shift from contact to control. While the initial encounter may have been relatively calm, the Spanish quickly moved to assert authority over the land and its people. One of the major factors was the introduction of European diseases. The Taino had no immunity to illnesses such as smallpox and influenza. These diseases spread rapidly and had devastating effects, reducing the population and weakening communities. At the same time, the Spanish began to impose a system of labor. Even though large-scale plantation had not yet been established in Jamaica during Columbus's time, the foundation of forced labor system was being laid. These systems disrupted traditional ways of life and placed increasing pressure on the Taino population. Another factor was a change in relationships. What began as curiosity and exchange turned into domination and exploitation. The Spanish demanded resources, labor, and obedience, altering the balance of power in their favor. The escalation was not immediate or uniform. It developed over time. But once it began, it created a cycle of decline that the Taino could not recover from. To summarize question 3, we saw where the Spanish, the relationship switched from exchange to control with the Tainos. And we saw where a gradual but irreversible decline of the Taino people. But now, let's examine question 4. What were the Key moments and turning point. Journey. The first key moment was Columbus's arrival itself. This marked the beginning of sustained European presence in Jamaica and set the stage for everything that followed. Another turning point was the formal claiming of the island for Spain. This act transformed Jamaica from an independent society into a territory within the global empire. The spread of diseases represents a turning point that is less visible but highly significant. It reintroduced and reduced the population dramatically and weakened the ability of the Taino to resist or adapt. The arrival of additional Spanish expeditions and settlers further solidified the control. These groups expanded the system of governance and labor that would define colonial rule. Finally, the gradual disappearance of Taino as a dominant population marks a long-term turning point. Their decline created a vacuum that would later be filled by forced migration of enslaved Africans, reshaping the island's demographic and cultural landscape. We saw where the island was quickly captured by Spain and more settlers arrived. We saw the gradual decline of the Tainos. But did you know the name of Jamaica under Spain was Santiago? Did you know the capital city at the time was St. Diego de la Vega, now Spanish Town? Did you know also that the name of the first capital was Sevilla Nuevo? Simply means New Seville. But what were the consequences and impact of Columbus's arrival? Join us to answer question 5. The impact of Columbus's arrival in Jamaica was far-reaching and long-lasting. On a human level, it led to the decline of the Taino population and loss of distinct culture and way of life. While elements of the Taino heritage remains, much of their identity was disrupted and erased. Culturally, this moment introduced the Europeans' influence that would shape language, religion, and social structures. Spanish colonization, followed by British rule, created layers of cultural change that continue to define Jamaica today. Economically, the groundwork was laid for plantation system and resources extracted forever. Although these systems would expand under British rule, their origins can be traced back to early periods of Spanish control. Politically, the island became a part of a larger imperial system. Decisions about land and governance were no longer made locally, but were influenced by distant powers. The most significant consequence, however, is a shift in historical trajectory. Columbus's arrival marked the transition from an indigenous society to a colonial one. A change that continues to influence Jamaica's identity, challenges, and development. Now that we know what Columbus was doing in the Caribbean, if you have any further adage, please leave a comment, share, or even give a like to this video. And we'll see you in the next one. Questions in History.